The termination meeting lasted exactly 7 minutes. My manager, Derek, had called it a performance review, but the stack of papers on his desk told a different story. I recognized the severance package format from my 3 years in HR before transitioning to financial analysis. These things happen, I suppose. Derek adjusted his tie twice before speaking. He mentioned my recent questions about discrepancies in the quarterly reports, called them disruptive, said I was becoming difficult to work with, that my attention to detail was creating unnecessary friction with established processes. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very skills they'd hired me for were now being cited as problematic. I had been documenting everything for 6 weeks. The irregularities first caught my attention during the March budget reconciliation. Small amounts at first, a few thousand here, a consulting fee there that didn't quite align with the vendor contracts I'd helped negotiate the previous year. Most people would have missed it. The beauty of embezzlement, I'd learned during my forensic accounting coursework, lies in its subtlety. Take just enough to matter, but not enough to trigger automated alerts. Derek had been clever. Not brilliant, but clever enough to exploit the gaps in our oversight system. The fake vendor invoices were sophisticated, complete with legitimate-looking business registrations and websites that would pass a cursory review. What he hadn't counted on was someone with both financial analysis training and access to the vendor management system. During that termination meeting, I listened as he explained how my recent behavior had created an uncomfortable work environment, how my persistent questioning of approved expenses showed a lack of trust in established procedures, how my suggestions for additional audit controls demonstrated poor team collaboration. He used corporate speak like a shield, deflecting from the real issue with practiced ease. I signed the papers without argument, asked about the timeline for transitioning my current projects, inquired about the process for collecting my personal items. Professional courtesy, nothing more. Derek seemed relieved by my calm response. Perhaps he'd expected anger or accusations. Instead, I thanked him for his time and mentioned that I'd need a few days to organize my files before the official end date. That evening, I reviewed my documentation one final time. Screenshots of discrepant transactions, copies of vendor contracts showing services never rendered, email threads where Derek had redirected questions about suspicious payments, bank routing information that led to accounts registered under variations of legitimate vendor names. The pattern was clear once you knew where to look. The decision to contact federal authorities wasn't made lightly. Corporate embezzlement involving falsified vendor relationships crosses into wire fraud territory when electronic transfers are involved. The amounts, while significant to our mid-sized company, weren't massive by federal standards. But the methodology suggested sophistication that typically indicates ongoing criminal activity. Special Agent Shen from the FBI Financial Crimes Unit returned my call within 2 hours. Her questions were precise, technical, focused on the mechanics of the scheme rather than workplace dynamics. She understood immediately why the discrepancies had gone undetected for so long. Our conversation lasted 90 minutes. By the end, she'd scheduled a meeting for the following week. I spent my final days at the company completing routine tasks and organizing files. Derek seemed almost friendly during these interactions, perhaps grateful that I wasn't causing drama during the transition. He even mentioned that he'd provide positive references for my job search. Corporate courtesy, I reflected, has its own peculiar rituals. The FBI interview took place on a Tuesday morning at their field office downtown. Agent Chen introduced me to her partner, Agent Martinez, who specialized in financial investigations. They'd already begun preliminary verification of the information I'd provided. The fake vendor websites were more sophisticated than they'd initially appeared, complete with false customer testimonials and fabricated project portfolios. Agent Chen explained their typical process for these investigations. Financial crimes units work methodically, building comprehensive cases before making arrests. They'd need to trace money flows, verify the extent of the scheme, and determine if other employees were involved. The timeline could stretch months, possibly longer. I answered their questions with the same attention to detail that had gotten me fired. Explained the company's vendor approval process, the gaps in our audit procedures, the routing of payments through our electronic systems, provided access to my personal documentation while ensuring I didn't violate any confidentiality agreements from my severance package. Agent Martinez asked why I decided to come forward after being terminated. The question seemed to assume vindictive motivation, which I understood from their perspective. I explained that the timing was coincidental. My documentation had been ongoing for weeks before Derek's decision to let me go. The termination had simply removed any remaining loyalty conflicts I might have felt. 3 weeks after my final day at the company, I started a new position with a consulting firm that specialized in financial risk assessment. The work was challenging, the compensation better, and my new colleagues seemed to value rather than fear attention to detail. Sometimes professional disruptions lead to better opportunities, though that wasn't something I could have predicted during Derek's termination meeting. My former company's quarterly earnings report came out 6 weeks later. The numbers looked solid, possibly even optimistic given the current market conditions. Derek had clearly continued his established procedures during the transition period. From a purely analytical perspective, I found myself curious about the sustainability of his approach. The first sign that federal investigation was progressing came through LinkedIn notifications. Former colleagues had begun updating their profiles with unusual frequency. The company's CFO suddenly listed additional certifications in compliance and regulatory oversight. The accounts payable manager emphasized her commitment to process integrity. Professional networks, I'd learned, often signal internal changes before they become publicly visible. Agent Chen called me on a Thursday evening in late July. She couldn't provide specific details about their investigation, but wanted to verify some technical aspects of the vendor payment system. Had there been any recent changes to the approval workflow? Any new oversight procedures implemented? Her questions suggested they were building a comprehensive understanding of the scheme's operation. I answered what I could while respecting confidentiality boundaries. Explained that my knowledge was limited to procedures in place during my employment. Mentioned that the system's design made it inherently vulnerable to the type of manipulation I'd identified. Suggested they might want to examine historical data going back further than my initial review had covered. The FBI's interest in historical patterns proved significant. Agent Martinez contacted me again 2 weeks later with questions about vendor relationships dating back 18 months. Their forensic accounting team had discovered evidence that the scheme predated my initial detection by a substantial margin. The sophistication I'd noted wasn't just creative thinking, it was the result of extended practice and refinement. By late August, industry contacts were mentioning unusual activity at my former company. Routine audits that had been expedited, vendor contracts under unexpected review, the kind of operational adjustments that suggested external scrutiny. Federal investigations tend to create ripple effects even when conducted discreetly. My new role provided interesting perspective on these developments. Risk assessment work requires understanding how organizational vulnerabilities develop and persist. The scheme I'd uncovered represented a textbook case of inadequate internal controls, combined with concentrated authority. Derek's position had given him oversight of exactly the processes he was manipulating. The consulting firm where I'd landed specialized in exactly these types of organizational assessments. My colleagues were impressed by the detail of my documentation and the systematic approach I'd taken to identifying the irregularities. They suggested I consider pursuing additional certification in forensic accounting, given my apparent aptitude for the work. In September, my former company announced unexpected leadership changes. Derek was taking a leave of absence for personal reasons, effective immediately. The CFO would assume additional responsibilities during the transition period. The press release mentioned ongoing reviews of operational procedures and vendor relationships. Corporate communication, as always, revealed more through what it didn't say than what it did. Agent Chen reached out again in early October. The investigation had reached a point where they needed to conduct interviews with current employees at the company. She wanted to confirm some details about my departure to ensure their approach wouldn't compromise either the investigation or my current employment situation. Professional courtesy, though I appreciated her consideration. The interviews at my former company apparently went smoothly. Agent Martinez mentioned during a brief phone call that my documentation had proven invaluable in focusing their inquiry. The systematic nature of my record-keeping had allowed them to quickly identify the scope and duration of the scheme. Without that foundation, the investigation might have taken significantly longer. November brought the first public indication that federal authorities were involved. A brief mention in the business section of the local newspaper about ongoing cooperation with regulatory investigations. The company's stock price dropped modestly, though not enough to suggest that investors understood the full implications. Financial markets often lag behind regulatory realities. My former colleagues began reaching out around this time. Casual messages asking about my new role, my thoughts on recent industry developments, whether I'd heard anything about the situation at our old company. Professional networks carry information in predictable patterns, and apparently my name had come up in internal discussions about the investigation. I maintained careful boundaries in these conversations, expressed appropriate concern for the company's well-being, while avoiding any discussion of specific details. mentioned that federal investigations were serious matters that required proper legal process. Professional discretion, especially in sensitive situations, tends to serve everyone's interest better than speculation. The indictment was unsealed on a Tuesday morning in December. Derek was charged with wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit embezzlement. The amounts involved were larger than my initial calculations had suggested. According to the federal complaint, the scheme had operated for nearly 2 years and involved over $800,000 in fraudulent transactions. Agent Chen called that afternoon to thank me for my cooperation and informed me that I might be contacted about testifying if the case went to trial. She mentioned that my systematic documentation had been crucial in establishing both the timeline and methodology of the scheme. The fake vendor network Derek had created was more extensive than anyone had initially realized. The news coverage was modest but thorough. Local business reporters focused on the impact to the company's operations and stock price. The federal charges were explained in terms that made the scheme's sophistication clear to general audiences. Derek's photograph in the newspaper showed him in a suit I recognized from company meetings, though his expressions suggested the weight of his situation had become clear. My former company issued a statement emphasizing their cooperation with federal authorities and their commitment to implementing enhanced oversight procedures. They mentioned bringing in external consultants to review their vendor management and payment authorization systems, the kind of expensive remediation that could have been avoided with proper controls from the beginning. Derek's attorney negotiated a plea agreement in February. The terms weren't made public, but federal sentencing guidelines for financial crimes typically involve both prison time and restitution requirements. Agent Martinez mentioned during a brief call that my testimony wouldn't be needed, given the strength of the documentary evidence and Derek's decision to accept responsibility. The company's recovery process provided an interesting case study in organizational resilience. New leadership implemented comprehensive audit procedures, centralized vendor approval processes, and established regular review cycles for financial controls. The very measures I'd suggested during my employment were now being adopted as standard practice. My consulting work increasingly focused on helping organizations prevent exactly the type of scheme Derek had operated. The experience of identifying, documenting, and reporting sophisticated financial fraud had given me credibility that classroom training alone couldn't provide. Clients valued practical knowledge of how these vulnerabilities develop and persist. By spring, industry contacts were mentioning my former company as an example of effective crisis management. Their stock price had recovered, new leadership was earning positive reviews, and their enhanced oversight procedures were being cited as best practices. Sometimes organizations emerge stronger from serious challenges, though the cost of learning can be substantial. Derek's sentencing hearing took place on a warm Thursday in May. 27 months in federal prison, 3 years supervised release, and full restitution of the embezzled funds. The judge's comments, according to news reports, emphasized the breach of fiduciary duty and the sophisticated nature of the scheme. Federal courts take financial crimes seriously, especially when they involve deliberate deception over extended periods. I found myself reflecting on the professional dimensions of the entire situation. Derek had been a competent manager in many respects, well regarded by both colleagues and senior leadership. His downfall wasn't a result of obvious character flaws or poor job performance. Instead, it stemmed from a series of incremental decisions that gradually escalated into serious criminal behavior. The consulting firm offered me a partnership track position that summer. My work in forensic financial analysis had generated substantial client interest, and they wanted to expand their capabilities in that area. The role would involve developing training programs, conducting risk assessments, and occasionally serving as an expert witness in litigation matters. Agent Chen sent a brief note thanking me again for my cooperation and mentioning that my case had been used as a training example for other financial crimes investigators. Apparently, the systematic nature of my documentation and the proactive approach I'd taken in contacting federal authorities represented best practices they wanted to encourage in similar situations. My former company reached out through their legal department that fall. They were conducting a comprehensive review of the embezzlement incident and wanted to discuss my role in identifying the scheme. The conversation was professional, focused on understanding how their systems had been vulnerable and what lessons could be learned for future prevention. During that discussion, the current CFO mentioned that my termination had been reconsidered in light of subsequent events. While they couldn't undo Derek's decision, they wanted me to know that my actions were now understood to have been appropriate and necessary. Professional vindication, even delayed, has its own satisfaction. The industry recognition came gradually but consistently. Conference speaking invitations, requests for articles about fraud detection methodologies, consulting opportunities with organizations seeking to strengthen their internal controls. My experience had become a case study in the importance of technical expertise and systematic documentation in identifying financial crimes. 2 years after Derek's sentencing, I was invited to speak at my former company's annual compliance training session. The irony of returning as an expert in the very areas that had gotten me fired wasn't lost on anyone present. The current leadership team emphasized that encouraging rather than discouraging this type of attention to detail was now a core organizational value. The presentation went well. I focused on practical aspects of fraud detection, the importance of proper documentation, and the professional obligations that come with identifying potential financial crimes. The audience was engaged, asking thoughtful questions about balancing loyalty to employers with broader ethical responsibilities. After the session, several attendees mentioned that they'd heard different versions of my story over the years. Some had been told I was terminated for poor performance. Others had heard I was difficult to work with. The actual facts, it seemed, had been obscured by the kind of narrative management that organizations often employ during crisis situations. I found these conversations illuminating rather than frustrating. Organizational memory tends to be selective, especially around events that reflect poorly on leadership decisions. The important outcome wasn't setting the record straight, but ensuring that current employees understood the value of technical expertise and systematic analysis. My current work continues to focus on helping organizations prevent financial fraud through better systems and stronger oversight procedures. Each client engagement provides a new perspective on how these schemes develop and why they often go undetected for extended periods. The patterns are remarkably consistent across different industries and organizational sizes. Derek was released from federal prison last month after serving his full sentence. His supervised release conditions include restrictions on financial management roles and regular reporting to federal probation officers. The restitution payments will continue for years, ensuring that the financial consequences extend well beyond the incarceration period. I occasionally wonder what might have happened if I'd approached the situation differently. Could I have addressed the irregularities through internal channels? Would Derek have responded to direct confrontation about the discrepancies? The counterfactuals are interesting to consider, though ultimately unprovable. What seems clear in retrospect is that my systematic approach to documentation and my decision to contact federal authorities were both necessary and appropriate. Financial crimes of this sophistication require specialized investigation techniques and legal authority that internal corporate processes simply cannot provide. The professional development that resulted from this experience has been substantial. My expertise in fraud detection and forensic analysis has opened opportunities I couldn't have anticipated during that 7-minute termination meeting with Derek. Sometimes career disruptions, however unwelcome at the time, lead to better outcomes than the original trajectory might have provided. My former company continues to thrive under new leadership. Their enhanced oversight procedures have become an industry model, and their commitment to encouraging rather than discouraging detailed financial analysis has attracted talented professionals who value systematic approach to their work. Organizations can learn from serious mistakes, though the learning process is rarely easy or inexpensive. The broader lesson I've concluded involves the importance of maintaining professional standards even when they create uncomfortable situations. Technical expertise exists to serve organizational interests, but sometimes serving those interests requires challenging established procedures or questioning authority figures. Derek's case has become a standard example in forensic accounting courses at several universities. The sophistication of his vendor fraud scheme, combined with the systematic nature of the detection and documentation process, provides students with realistic understanding of how financial crimes operate and how they can be identified through careful analysis. I continue to receive occasional calls from FBI agents working on similar cases. The methodical approach I took to documentation and the proactive decision to contact federal authorities apparently represent best practices they want to encourage. Each case is different, but the fundamental principles of systematic analysis and proper reporting remain consistent. The consulting firm has grown substantially, partly based on the reputation we've developed in forensic financial analysis. Clients understand that preventing fraud requires more than just implementing software solutions or conducting periodic audits. It requires fostering organizational cultures that value technical expertise and encourage employees to ask difficult questions about irregular patterns. My current role involves training other professionals in fraud detection methodologies. The curriculum emphasizes both technical skills and professional judgment. Students learn to recognize the patterns that indicate potential financial crimes, but they also learn about the ethical and legal obligations that come with this knowledge. The training sessions often include discussion of my experience with Derek's embezzlement scheme, not as a personal story, but as a case study in the importance of systematic documentation and appropriate reporting channels. The goal is to help participants understand that technical expertise comes with responsibilities that extend beyond immediate organizational loyalty. These discussions frequently touch on the professional challenges that can result from identifying financial crimes. Students understand that whistleblower protections exist, but they also recognize that career consequences can be substantial. The decision to report suspected fraud requires careful consideration of both ethical obligations and practical realities. My perspective on these challenges has evolved considerably over the past several years. The immediate professional disruption was significant, but the long-term benefits have far outweighed the short-term costs. Technical expertise in fraud detection has proven to be increasingly valuable as organizations recognize the importance of proper oversight and internal controls. The industry transformation has been remarkable. Regulatory requirements have strengthened, audit procedures have become more sophisticated, and organizational cultures increasingly value rather than fear the kind of detailed analysis that identifies potential problems. Professional standards have evolved in directions that make situations like mine less likely to result in termination. Derek's story serves as a cautionary tale about how incremental ethical compromises can escalate into serious criminal behavior. His initial deceptions were modest, almost justifiable as administrative shortcuts. Over time, the scheme became more sophisticated, and the amounts involved became substantial. Federal prison was the inevitable endpoint of a process that began with minor procedural violations. The broader implications extend beyond individual cases to organizational culture and professional development. Companies that encourage technical expertise and detailed analysis tend to identify problems early when they can be addressed through internal processes. Organizations that discourage uncomfortable questions or view attention to detail as problematic often discover serious issues only after they become criminal matters requiring federal investigation. My current work increasingly focuses on helping organizations create cultures that support rather than undermine technical expertise. This involves training management teams to recognize the value of detailed analysis, establishing processes that encourage rather than punish identification of irregularities, and ensuring that employees understand both their obligations and their protections when they identify potential fraud. The satisfaction I derive from this work extends beyond professional accomplishment to include broader social benefit. Financial fraud imposes costs on everyone involved, from individual employees to shareholders to taxpayers who fund federal investigations and prosecutions. Prevention through better systems and stronger professional standards serves everyone's interests. Agent Chen, who led the FBI investigation, has since been promoted to supervise financial crimes investigations across multiple field offices. She occasionally speaks at conferences about the importance of proactive reporting by private sector professionals. My case apparently represents the kind of systematic approach and cooperative attitude that makes federal investigations more effective. The relationship with my former company has remained professional and constructive. They've engaged my consulting firm for several projects related to strengthening internal controls and training staff in fraud detection. The leadership team understands that my actions ultimately serve the organization's interests, even though the immediate impact was disruptive. These ongoing professional relationships provide interesting perspective on organizational learning and adaptation. Companies that experience serious fraud often emerge with stronger systems and better understanding of the importance of technical expertise. The expensive lessons learned through crisis can become competitive advantages if properly implemented. My role in professional development programs has expanded to include serving on advisory boards for forensic accounting certification programs. The field has grown substantially as organizations recognize the value of specialized expertise in fraud detection and prevention. Academic programs are producing better trained professionals who understand both technical and ethical dimensions of the work. The student presentations I evaluate often include analysis of cases similar to Derek's embezzlement scheme. These exercises help future professionals understand how financial crimes develop, how they can be detected through systematic analysis, and how proper documentation supports both internal investigation and external reporting when necessary. The most rewarding aspect of this teaching involves helping students understand that technical expertise comes with professional obligations that extend beyond immediate employment relationships. Forensic accountants serve broader social interests by identifying and reporting financial crimes, even when doing so creates personal or professional challenges. Derek's case continues to generate interest among researchers studying organizational behavior and professional ethics. The progression from respected manager to federal criminal provides insights into how financial pressures and opportunity can overcome ethical constraints. The systematic nature of his scheme demonstrates sophistication that develops through practice and refinement over time. Academic analysis of the case often focuses on the organizational factors that enabled the fraud to continue undetected for extended periods. Inadequate internal controls, concentrated authority, and cultural discouragement of detailed questioning all contributed to creating an environment where sophisticated financial crimes could flourish. My documentation and reporting process has become a model for how private sector professionals should respond when they identify potential financial crimes. The systematic approach, careful attention to legal boundaries, and proactive cooperation with federal authorities represent best practices that serve both individual and organizational interests. The professional recognition that has resulted from this experience includes invitations to serve on industry committees, developing standards for fraud detection and reporting. These positions provide opportunities to influence professional development in directions that support technical expertise and ethical conduct. The consulting firm's growth has enabled us to take on increasingly sophisticated assignments involving complex financial crimes and organizational risk assessment. Client organizations understand that preventing fraud requires more than implementing software solutions. It requires fostering cultures that value and support technical expertise. Recent projects have involved helping organizations recover from serious fraud incidents, implementing enhanced oversight procedures, and training staff to recognize and report suspicious patterns. Each engagement provides new insights into how financial crimes develop and how they can be prevented through better systems and stronger professional standards. The federal prosecution of Derek's case established legal precedents that strengthen enforcement of financial crimes laws. The sophisticated nature of his vendor fraud scheme required prosecutors to demonstrate complex patterns of deception across multiple financial institutions and electronic payment systems. The successful conviction sends clear messages about federal commitment to investigating and prosecuting these crimes. My testimony preparation for the trial that never occurred provided valuable insight into how federal prosecutors build cases involving sophisticated financial crimes. The systematic documentation I had maintained proved crucial in establishing timelines, demonstrating intent and showing the scope of the scheme. Proper record-keeping serves multiple purposes beyond immediate investigation needs. The industry transformation over the past several years has created new opportunities for professionals with expertise in fraud detection and prevention. Organizations increasingly understand that technical competence in identifying financial irregularities provides competitive advantage through better risk management and stronger internal controls. My current role involves helping clients develop comprehensive fraud prevention programs that integrate technical controls with cultural changes that encourage reporting of suspicious activities. The most effective approaches combine systematic oversight procedures with organizational environments that support rather than punish identification of potential problems. The relationships I've developed with federal law enforcement continue to provide valuable perspective on emerging fraud patterns and investigation techniques. Agent Chen and her colleagues occasionally consult with our firm about trends they're seeing in financial crimes and ways that private sector organizations can better cooperate with federal investigations. These ongoing professional connections have enhanced my understanding of how financial crimes investigation has evolved in response to increasingly sophisticated schemes. Federal agencies have developed specialized expertise and technological capabilities that enable them to pursue complex cases that would have been difficult to prosecute just a few years ago. The training programs I've developed for private sector professionals emphasize the importance of understanding federal investigation processes and legal requirements. Employees who identify potential financial crimes need to understand both their obligations and the proper channels for reporting their concerns. Professional education in these areas serves everyone's interests. Derek's story has become a standard case study, not just in forensic accounting programs, but also in business ethics and organizational behavior courses. The progression from respected professional to federal criminal provides students with realistic understanding of how ethical failures develop and escalate over time. My involvement in these educational programs allows me to share practical insights about the professional and personal challenges that come with identifying and reporting financial crimes. Students need to understand that doing the right thing sometimes involves significant personal costs, but that technical expertise comes with ethical obligations that extend beyond immediate employment relationships. The satisfaction I derive from this work has evolved from personal vindication to broader professional purpose. The experience of identifying sophisticated financial fraud, documenting it systematically, and cooperating with federal investigation has provided expertise that serves both individual clients and broader social interests. My former company's transformation following Derek's prosecution demonstrates that organizations can learn from serious mistakes and emerge stronger. Their current leadership team has created an environment that encourages rather than discourages the kind of detailed analysis that identifies potential problems before they become criminal matters. The industry recognition that has resulted from my experience continues to generate opportunities for professional development and contribution to broader standards in fraud detection and prevention. Technical expertise in these areas has become increasingly valuable as organizations recognize the importance of proper oversight and internal controls. The professional journey from terminated employee to recognized expert in forensic financial analysis demonstrates that technical competence, when combined with ethical conduct and systematic approach to documentation, can overcome even significant short-term setbacks. Derek's 7-minute termination meeting ultimately led to opportunities I couldn't have anticipated at the time. The broader lesson involves the importance of maintaining professional standards even when they create uncomfortable situations or challenging relationships with authority figures. Technical expertise exists to serve organizational interests, but sometimes serving those interests requires questioning established procedures or challenging accepted practices. My current work continues to focus on helping organizations create environments that support technical expertise and encourage identification of potential problems before they become serious issues. The goal is to prevent situations like Derek's from developing by fostering cultures that value systematic analysis and ethical conduct. The professional vindication has been complete, but more importantly, the experience has led to work that serves broader social interests. Financial fraud prevention through better systems and stronger professional standards benefits everyone involved, from individual employees to shareholders to taxpayers who ultimately bear the costs of investigation and prosecution. Derek's case will continue to serve as an example of how sophisticated financial crimes develop and how they can be detected through careful analysis and proper reporting. The lessons learned extend beyond individual accountability to include organizational responsibility for creating environments that prevent rather than enable fraudulent behavior. The 7-minute meeting that ended my employment at that company ultimately led to a career focused on exactly the kind of technical expertise and ethical conduct that Derek's termination decision was meant to discourage. Sometimes professional setbacks, however unwelcome at the time, create opportunities for contributions that extend far beyond the original employment relationship. Professional vindication, I've learned, isn't about proving others wrong or achieving personal satisfaction through their downfall. It's about demonstrating that technical expertise and ethical conduct serve broader interests that extend beyond immediate organizational relationships. Derek's imprisonment serves justice, but the real success lies in helping prevent similar situations through better systems and stronger professional standards.